In superhero comics, there's no such thing as a boring character, just boring takes on a character. And today, I'm going to talk about Kite Man. Hell yeah! This is Issue at Hand, the Polygon show where the subject is already so weird that I can't make surreal humor out of it, and I'm your host, Susanna Polo. Did you know that Batman's butler, Alfred, was originally introduced as a joke character? He was an amateur detective whose mistakes allowed Batman and Robin to look smart by comparison. You might have gathered that Lex Luthor used to be more of a mad scientist than a corporate king. He was redesigned from the ground up after the Crisis on Infinite Earths reboot. And Mr. Freeze was just a diamond thief with a cold gun until Batman the Animated Series rebranded him as a tragic scientist trying to cure his sick wife. This is the magic of never-ending comic book universes. Not that characters can change over time, but that any character can change over time, even the ones you least expect. And the best example of that I've seen in a long time happened this year in Batman to Kite Man. As you may already be guessing, Kite Man is a supervillain who commits crimes using an arsenal of kites and gliding-based vehicles and weapons. An absurd Silver Age villain who's long lost his gravitas, if indeed he ever had any. But now, thanks to an arc in DC's Batman series, he's not a joke anymore. Or maybe he still is. Let me explain. Kite Man has been an occasional running gag in Tom King's Batman since last year. He steals something, he says his name, he says hell yeah, he gets his ass beat. When I talked to King at San Diego Comic-Con this summer, he told me that that was just how it started. Artist Ivan Rice had put in an extra panel that needed some dialogue, and he threw in Kite Man hell yeah because he thought it was funny. But then he started thinking more about Kite Man, about how he'd been created by Bill Finger, about how his real name was, and I'm not kidding, Charlie Brown. Let's go on a tangent. If I asked you who created Batman, you might say Bob Kane, and you'd be partially right. This is going to sound like a comic book story itself, but it is actually the real story of the co-creation of Batman. Bob Kane, the artist on the earliest Batman stories, took full credit and full compensation for creating Batman until 2015. Batman's writer, Bill Finger, died penniless in 1974, with his body lying undiscovered in his apartment for several days. Kane's contract ensured that he was credited as the only creator of Batman in every Batman comic, and anything based on a Batman comic, until Finger's living heirs successfully petitioned Warner Brothers to change the line. And if you want to see the documentary about one comics historian's search for Finger's living heirs, check out Batman and Bill. It's hard to overstate Bill Finger's contributions to the DC Universe. He gave Bruce Wayne and Gotham City their names, and he contributed major elements to the Joker and Robin. He invented Batman's cape and cowl, and his Batmobile and Batcave, and his noir detective nature. He created the villains of Catwoman and Clayface, as well as Superman's teenage love interest, Lana Lang. And he's the reason that Batman comics have so many huge replicas of everyday objects. He also created Kite Man. And, as Tom King pointed out to me, that means that Kite Man didn't start out as a joke. It was a quarter century after Kite Man's debut that comic creator Tony Isabella wanted a lighter villain to brighten up his work on Hawkman. And with a flying superhero, a flying supervillain seemed natural. Isabella was the first writer to give Kite Man a secret identity, and named him after another famous kite-flying comics character, Charlie Brown. He also had him crash into a tree and go, "Rats." That contrast between a silly character intended seriously and between an obscure supervillain and one of the most famous cartoon characters ever interested Tom King. Which brings us back to Batman and the War of Jokes and Riddles. The War of Jokes and Riddles is a story arc that's been running in Batman this year. It's about Batman telling a story about the one time that the Joker and the Riddler went to war against each other, and every supervillain in Gotham had to choose a side. Because Batman doesn't really know who he is if he's not feeling guilty about something, he has been keeping a list of every person killed or hurt in the war. And in the middle of this story, we get another story just about one of those people. You may already be guessing what this story is about, but in practice it plays out kind of quietly. It seems like Batman 27 is about a former Joker henchman who Batman has coerced into setting up a meeting with the Joker so that he can capture him and end the war. From there, this poor henchman, whose name is Chuck Brown, is pulled between Batman, the Joker, and the Riddler. Each of them thinks they're using him to get the upper hand on the other two. And in the middle of all that, we get to see Chuck with his son, Charlie. They're flying a kite. and Chuck is telling him not to use a curse word. Anyway, the meeting doesn't go well. Chuck's family gets put in protective services, but it's too late. The Riddler poisoned his son with a chemical on his kite string. And so Chuck does the only thing that makes sense in Gotham City. The thing that only makes sense in Gotham City. He uses his degree in aerodynamics engineering to make himself a kite-based supervillain, and he goes to fight for the Joker side of the gang war. Surprise! It was a Kite Man origin story all along. It's sad. A father struggling to relate to his son and then watching him die. It's also ridiculous. A poisoned kite string? Chuck Brown? Good grief? The issue literally begins with Batman walks into a bar. Suddenly, Kite Man is more than just a joke. He's a character with goals and desires, and that gives him pathos. And as the tide turns against the Joker and his allies, you root for him. You want something to go right for him. You want Tom King to just let him kick the football for once in his sad little life. But he doesn't. Without giving too much away, in the end it turns out that the Riddler made Kite Man. Kite Man's existence is just the punchline on an elaborate joke the Riddler is telling for the Joker, trying to solve Gotham's biggest riddle. Tom King saw that he could make Kite Man embody both sides of the war of jokes and riddles. The fact that he was inexplicable could be used as a joke, but it could also be used as something that needed to be explained. To the Riddler, Kite Man was a joke, but to King, he was a riddle. Kite Man may have started out as something silly and shallow and not very interesting, but all it took was one comics writer to make him a character I cared about. And that means that it only takes one comics writer to make any character someone you care about. Next time on Issue at Hand, who watches the Watchmen episode? You.
This time I'm gonna kick that football clear to the moon!